Hello everyone and welcome to today's Dr. Spotfire, where we are going to talk about a very interesting topic asked by many of our customers, that embedding Spotfire into the websites. It's Our motto is always about learning is not driven by answers but by questions. And I'm hosting today from Boston, and our featured presenter Jagrata is going to present from Seattle office. um, I'm just today the format of slides I changed because the content is so rich and so much. I want to give all the time possible to Jagrata. So this is our next session, which will be on December 3rd, of scaling Spotfire. Another topic from administration and infra side asked by many customers. It's about consideration techniques that go into when you are scaling or provisioning Spotfire server and webplayer nodes. So don't miss our next session as well. As always, we are creating new user groups on Reddit, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. LinkedIn one is there are many customers joining every day. So please try to join in. I will share the links in chat after some time. And today's session, embedding Spotfire in website, Jagrata, our solution consultant, going to present. So Jagrata, floor is all yours.
Great, thanks very much, Ninad. I'll share my screen now. Today, as Ninad said, we're going to be showing you the options for embedding Spotfire analyses into websites. We have about 3 or 4 different examples that we'll focus on, and along the way, there will be assets on the typical community site that will show to let you focus on what you really need to learn amidst all the different things that are out there. And so we're going to start today with what I'll call the old medicine. If you have a web page like this one here, it may be present on your file system somewhere. For example, if you have if you have IIS, Microsoft's web server, you may put the file right here or a folder in here, and you have some kind of a HTML file. So if you want to be embedding Spotfire into some web page, you're going to need to have a web server. So if you have Microsoft's web server, then you might have a very simple page. What if we wanted just to put an analysis inside of this page? The easiest way to do that would be to go to Spotfire server, open up the library. Let's say that you browse to some analysis in the web player. And while you're in viewing mode, go to File, Share and Copy Link. Now the link it presents here basically will open up this page that we're already looking at. But if you click Advanced, then it'll offer you, among other things, in iframe elements that you'll be able to use in the construction of your web page to embed that Spotfire analysis inside your web page. So I'll update my index.html file, go back to where we were looking at the welcome page, refresh it, and now we'll be able to see the Spotfire analysis inside the page. This is the old medicine, but it's alive and kicking. So you can click on things, the updates, you can move between pages for a good effect, etc. Now, at this point, I'd like to talk about our first resource, the typical Spotfire Tips and Tricks homepage maintained by Helene Snelting. Contains a wealth of links to different things you might want to do with Spotfire. In particular, under Advanced Visualizations, there's a page on embedding Spotfire visualizations into a web page. And you might take this as your first foray into the new medicine, where we use the so-called JavaScript API to embed Spotfire analyses in web pages where you can have bits and pieces in different places. You don't have to embed the entire web player. So DJ Rajdev walks us through how to do that carefully. And the main reason that I bring up this example right now is because she offers a pro tip a little further down on the page. And she's saying essentially that if you don't have access to a web server, You may actually have access to one, but not realize it. She identifies here how if you are using Google Drive and you or your organization allows you to allow public access to folders by designation, then you can put your web page into one of those folders and browse it through the pattern that she identifies as a web page, and Google Drive will act as the web server. So it's not just opening the file, it's actually opening the web page. And so everything, if you didn't have access to IIS, then you could do the things that we're showing today, for example, by using Google Drive. And there are similar identifications of things if you're using AWS S3, etc. And in fact, as we move on, we'll also show how to use the Tomcat web server framework. Okay, so let's go back to what I'm calling the new medicine. There is a key page now titled the TIBCO Spotfire JavaScript API Overview, maintained by Magnus Relanda. This is the page. This is the main page which describes on TIBCO community wiki all the things that you can do with the JavaScript API. So I would, if you're interested in this whole activity, I would recommend that you read a lot of this page. The key capabilities are bullet pointed right here. And so, as we'll see in a later example, there are lots of examples that you can, of these that you can pull up from a single source. There are links to related things, and there's a very careful description of how you would put together a web page using the JavaScript API. And I'd like to narrate this a little bit to demystify it, because if you don't currently use a lot of HTML code or any JavaScript, it may look a little bit confusing. But this is actually very short, the bits that you need, and you'll be able to use this pattern over and over and over to very good effect. And we'll show you both an example that Magnus links to, and also a second, more replete example of my own construction in today's presentation. So let's start by just walking through this a little bit. Your HTML page will have an HTML tag or element at the top. In the head elements, you have things that don't directly render. You may be setting the encoding. Okay, fine. You may be setting some browser compatibility. You may be putting a title, which would later appear in the title bar as we hover up here. And then this line is very important. So this is where you would identify some instance of Spotfire server. So this URL could be directing towards your on-premise installation of Spotfire server, or to your cloud instance, as here. Then the last part of it instructs this web page to load the JavaScript API, thereby exposing a number of, well, classes, methods, etc., that we can use as you go forward. The actual body or visible part of this page is extremely simple. It just contains a single block element, a div element, with an ID called container. And that's key. This is the golden link right here, this ID attribution to to your page and Spotfire web player. After the body element, there's a script element, and now this is where the JavaScript comes in, as in JavaScript API. If this looks a little bit long, it's really not that bad, and it's the same thing every time. I'll show you the parts which vary. You instantiate a couple of objects here. This is where you would put the URL to your instance of Spotfire server, and we'll see this in action in a customized context, /Spotfire/WP. And then these, the customization info that we don't need at the moment, but I'll say what role it serves and how to find out the different ways you can set it. Then the second key part is the analysis path. So this is the path inside your Spotfire library to the Spotfire analysis that you want to show bits and pieces of. There can be further parameters, And there's reload instances setting, and there's an API version, which if you're using Spotfire 7.14 or above, you put 7.14. And there's a similar block of templates for Spotfire 7.13, and below is slightly different custom calling, but we'll focus on the more recent one today. And then with this call right here, you create the application object inside of Spotfire. And as soon as it's ready, it looks for a function by this name. Oh, there it is. And it'll execute what's done here. And the most important thing that this does is write this line here where it instantiates the doc object as a document inside of your analysis, and it will look for a div element in your page with the ID container, and it will put it right in between here. It will populate that div with that object. Now, what is this object? This is a key point. In the JavaScript API, the smallest item in your Spotfire analysis that you have access to is a page. More on that in a second, but let's first see how it works in action. The example that I wanted to begin with is not linked to in the See Also area, but rather a little bit further down where there are several examples indicated. We will, in fact, look at a few of these. The Mashup example with multiple views is our first whistle stop. Click on it and you get to this page. This page identifies how it works, and it offers you a download so that what I'm doing here today, if you have, for example, IIS, you can do. If you download this zip file, you will get it on your file system. And if you unzip it, you'll get a resources folder, a mapdemo.html, and a DXP file. So let's walk through the steps and how you get to work with it. First of all, if you open up the DXP file, you see the different pages that could be exposed as individual artifacts in your web page. And we'll see this page right here, brand day planning. You see that it has a drill down. This would get saved into the Spotfire library. And in our case, I put it right in the root of the directory. We'll see that reflected in the web pages code. Then, if you look at the file mapdemo.html, you'll see something that looks a lot like what we just walked through earlier. And in this first example, I want to focus on just getting this thing up and running. So we've put the DXP in the Spotfire library, and we have mapdemo.html. And if we go into our friendly browser, then we can identify, we can browse to that object, localhost here in IIS, maps to the www root. So then you see Dr. Spotfire and mapdemo.html. Now the way this one works is that not only does it show you on the left-hand side a drill down in Spotfire, that's, remember, coming from a single page, but it also lets you communicate with Bing Map, which is, well, I guess I would say kind of nifty. If I hover over, if I select 2 points from the scatter plot at bottom, it identifies the driving routes corresponding to the route between those two cities that are represented by rows in the underlying data table. So the data here is representing different physicians, clinics, and it has to do with a salesperson of pharmaceuticals going to visit them. That's the putative use case. But there's bidirectional communication. So if I click on one of the physician's endpoints, I get another pop-up Spotfire visualization right in front of me. And we'll also see this particular move later. But the important thing is we've used the JavaScript API to embed this page from a Spotfire analysis. We have bidirectional communication between that part of the analysis and the rest of the page, in this case, a Bing map. And importantly, this is downloadable and ready for use by you. I guess the only important thing to say that I changed was the identification of where the analysis is inside of my library, and I put it right at the root. So I'd like to step forward now with another example. Oh, by the way, when people think about the prospect of using just a single page of my Spotfire analysis, so I mentioned earlier, you can put just a single page in. Well, what if I have a kind of neat analysis that has quite a few pages, all sorts of things on them? How would I get this JavaScript API ready, where I blow these up and I put them all on separate pages? The good news is that Kyle Hashi has created something for that. It's also present on the TIPCO community wiki, and it gives you a IronPython script, which will take an original DXP and it'll take all of the different visualizations on it and put it on separate pages. So now you can just address the pages individually. You can still put multiple pieces in one web page in the embedding. And if you wanted to have just a single chart, let's say, and another single chart, this would ensure that they're on separate pages so that you can work with them separately as you'd want to. Okay, let's go to another example. If you're thinking about embedding web pages, you may have the thought that, well, I've got Spotfire, I've got the web player, so there must be some web server in the mix. And indeed there is. A Spotfire server is a Tomcat application. So Apache Tomcat is a Java-based web server, web application server framework. And you could, in theory, just use the Tomcat instance that Spotfire runs in to host your mashups. But that may not be a good idea if you don't manage that instance, and you in fact may not be allowed to. But just to round things out, I'm going to show the next example using Tomcats. So what takes the place of www root will be down in this area. I have a mashups folder under the root folder, and this is where we'll find our next examples. So let's go back to the browser for a second. I have created a sort of fronting page here, a very simple HTML page, which I can show you in text format here. Nothing special going on, no JavaScript API, but it does links to the subsequent pages that we'll look at in today's presentation. This link here brings us to a page that's the first stop now in our hand-built JavaScript API examples. Not much going on in it, but it does have the critical connection between two separate visualizations in Spotfire. So you can see that they have the linked marking. And this opens the door for a whole panoply of things that you might want to do with your web page and with several pieces of a Spotfire analysis embedded in it. The page itself is this one. So here's the text. If you were to view source page, you'd see something like this. And it's because I'm rendering it in the Tomcat web server, it executes the JavaScript, just like IIS, and just like it would if you had it hosted by the web server under Google Docs or AWS S3, etc. It has the same pattern that we looked at earlier. We have the head elements, a couple of meta tags, a title, and then the all-important script that loads the JavaScript API. So in my case, you might have noticed a little bit earlier when I showed the library up top that I'm running Spotfire server on my local machine here on port 2780. And that's why you see that localhost 2780 right here. And this is the same syntax that you use we saw earlier to load the JavaScript API. My body is very simple. It has an H1 element introducing Spotfire JavaScript API, and it has 2 div elements. And I've taken the easy route and just put them inside of a table and 2 table cell elements so that they come into picture side by side the way we saw them. Here. And so going down, there's really nothing new about what happens below. This is the same pattern as before, except I'm using my URI for the Spotfire server instance and my path in my library to where this particular analysis is located. So these you will change to fit your environments. And I'm showing a little bit more on the customization. I'm identifying that I don't want to see the status bar, the toolbar, or page navigation. And I have 2 document objects that have been instantiated with the same pattern that we saw earlier. And they will be trying to find their way into div elements with these 2 respective IDs, same pattern as before. Earlier, if you remember, I think I have it, I don't have it handy. So early, oh, here it is. If you remember when we, oh, I don't have it handy. When we referenced the particular page of the analysis that we wanted to instantiate as an object here, we used 0, the index of the first page. So you might look and say, hey, wait a minute, Jagrata, you're using the name of the page, it looks like now. And I say, well, yes, I am using the name of the page. Here they are. So how did I know that I could use both of those? So we'll get back to that exact point in just a moment. But you can use either a 0-based numerical index to the page number or the page's name itself. This is the page in your analysis. And we have 2 of them. They're finding their way into these 2 divs, so they'll be placed here and here respectively. And just to put a point on things, what would happen if I changed show page navigation to true? If we save that and then refresh our web page, we should now see the page tabs underneath. To turn this on its head, a common question is, how do I hide the page tabs? And the answer is, well, what we started with. Have show page navigation equals false. And if you wanted to understand what is the whole collection of options that I have to feed into customization info, then I would say the usual answer is to go back to Magnus. Go back to the JavaScript API Overview, and in it, you'll find a reference to a number of these things, like the create application call, and the later on the open document call is mentioned. This is a high-level discussion of the various parameters, including the customization info parameter. And when you click on one of the links to the instances of the Java things, it brings you to some place on the web player JavaScript API reference page. So we're also going to be disseminating this resource. And for example, if you wanted to know about the customization class, then you can go into there a little bit earlier and see all its properties. These are all the things that you can set. And a moment ago, we were doing showed page navigation. A little bit earlier, we mentioned that on our application, we invoked the open document method. And we said that initial page in one example was set to a 0-based index. In another case was set to the page name. Indeed, in the description, it says you can either use the page index or the page title as a string. So all the details are present up here. What that means is that when you see something that looks like an example of what you might be able to do in many other contexts, look that up in the reference. That'll give you the complete description. Okay. Great. Let's go now to the next step. In the Mashup Portal, there was a second example, Sales Analysis Part 2. And if we look at that one, there's a little bit more going on. And so in this example, we'll show how you can incorporate other JavaScript artifacts into your web page and into the put together with the embedding. In this case, we have tabs that are showing the same parts of an analysis in different instances of Spotfire server. Now, if you don't have IIS, if you don't have Tomcat, you don't have access to public folders on Google Drive, you may have a typical Spotfire cloud account. And so I have put in my public folder on TIBCO Cloud this analysis. In fact, I think I may have it, may be able to show that to you in a moment where I've put it. And so what's going on with this, I have the same, linked visualizations, so the same kind of drill down going on. If I want to pop out this analysis, I can click on that icon we just saw. You can work with this in the usual ways, turning layers on and off. And then you can close this and it pops itself back in place. You can bring up a comparison, a secondary visualization that again is going to be actually a full page in your analysis underneath a button. And you can also bring up, for the sake of optimizing real estate on the page, a pop-up that might give useful information to the end user. Let's see how this one is put together and talk a little bit more about how you can incorporate third-party JavaScript libraries that you may already have a practice with. If you don't have a practice with them, this at least points to some of the potential that you may want to consider going forward. When we were in the portal page, you can see when I hover here, get that go away. This is looking at Mashup 01 on an API test version. So that indeed is this file right here. Okay. And in this put together, there is the usual pattern we see at the top, the title, and then we load the JavaScript API. There are also these two lines which load third-party, in this case, which load cascading style sheets. So they automatically style things that have a certain class or ID, etc. And then we have a browser conditional bit where we load two different JavaScript libraries. In the body elements, there's a little bit more going on, but most of it is not specific to the Spotfire JavaScript API. In fact, the only things that are relevant here to the JavaScript API, Spotfire's JavaScript API, are the div elements which have an ID that is mentioned, which ID is mentioned down below. Page 1 doc through page 6 doc. So the only places where the JavaScript API for Spotfire is brought into the picture is where we have div elements that have one of those 6 IDs. And in those places, when the page renders, it will put the corresponding page of the analysis right inside of that div. So it's the same pattern that we saw in the earlier examples. The only difference here is that there's other things going on, and this may represent your particular practice with JavaScript. allowing things like the pop-outs that we saw. There's a second thing going on here where we implemented tabs, also using the styling from one of those cascading style sheets that were imported. And what we're doing on clicking is we're calling this function that's defined a little bit later outside of the body elements, which is going to change these properties that are used in rendering the Spotfire elements with the Spotfire JavaScript API. So you recognize analysis path, you recognize web player server root URL from previously, and then because this is how we saw them earlier, right? This is the same pattern that we saw in the previous examples. All is the same. Down here is all the same. And what we'll do if you click on one of the tabs is we'll swap out the value of one or both of these two parameters, and then we'll recreate the application object that we created earlier when we first opened the page with this call. We'll recreate it with possibly a different value for where the web player is and a different path in our library for where the analysis is. That's all that's going on. And so on clicking them, we don't see anything different because I've got the same analysis stored in my cloud account that I do inside of my my on-premise, my locally installed Spotfire server. And so that's how we get to what's going on. There it is on this page. I'm going to do a quick. I have one more example that I want to walk through. It's the kind of Swiss Army knife of the examples, and it also is downloadable from Magnus's marvelous overview page on the wiki. I'm going to pause for a quick second, make sure that there's no questions that need to be addressed right away. Okay, there's quite a few questions, so I'm going to go briskly through the next example to allow enough time. And if you have to leave at the bottom of the hour here, rest assured that you have some things now that you can download and use right away. I haven't made this last example available for download, but the ones previous were. And if you can stay, the next one that we're showing is also available. So let's talk about that one. Inside of the overview page, we mentioned a little bit earlier that there were some examples called out. So higher a little bit. We showed the Mashup example with multiple views. We also showed Kyle Hashi's page blowup Iron Python script. And now we're going to show the test utility example. And everything that has links, we'll give you links, we'll publish the links to you following this presentation so that you can use them. If you go to that page, you'll find a description of what's going on in it. And then you will all, excuse me, a download. If you download things, then you'll be able to put them in place, the different folders and files in place. In my case, I put them inside of my Tomcat application area, and I expose it through my front page here. So the API test utility example is going to show a Spotfire analysis here, which has got filters and drop downs, and it has pages, and it has different visualizations. And in the left-hand side, it shows you a number, it exposes a number of things that you can query and set against the analysis using the JavaScript API. Now bear in mind that when you download this example, you get both the web page, which is very slim, and also the JavaScript itself. So you can go right into this and see exactly what it's doing when you click on any of the buttons. So you can take it apart and break it and fix it and make it your own. Now, to talk about it a little bit, if you click, for example, get all properties, it'll give you the answer to that all down here. You get all the name value pairs of all the properties that are addressable inside of your analysis. If you click get document metadata, it puts that down here too. And so if you have a page name, revenue by country, you can set the active page that will effectively click here. And so on it goes. And so I find out what the marking names are, and you can get a marking, and you can indicate what happens when you change a marking. You can get filters, etc. So all the things that you can reference from here, from the JavaScript API, you can access and exercise through this example. Now, the idea of getting or setting things in the, to create the context for your analysis brings up another aspect of embedding story that I haven't talked about yet. I think it was actually hinted at in the first example that we showed. I suppose you have to log in again here. When we opened up the returns analysis, I guess it's already open, and we went File, Share, Copy Link, and we hit the Advanced tab. There, in addition to the iframe snippet, were a number of other things that you could do with this link. You could set a bookmark. You can do a preset size. You can undo or allow undo and redo to be shown, etc., etc., etc. Now, a lot of these things ultimately fold into the link through what's called a configuration block. If we just look at the link itself, and I'll go ahead, copy it, and put it into a text editor where we can look at it. Everything that follows the question mark here, in other words, the query string, can contain things other than the specification of the file inside the analysis. There can be various other options involved. And there's a system for working with these in Spotfire that's available to us called the configuration blocks. There's a number of things that you can set when an analysis is opened by working with the configuration block. And that's also described by Magnus. He has a separate page on it, but it's not directly relevant to using the API itself, since the API accommodates a lot of those things in its own way. But if you do run into this, or if you have another context for using it, I didn't want to neglect to talk about configuration blocks. Let's see if I have a. So when you create, if you're using the API and you're creating the application object, or if you're just using the old medicine, as it were, what you're doing here when you are specifying some of the the configurations, the parameters here, not the customization info, but the parameters, is you're specifying what will become the configuration block when the analysis is invoked. So this will be part of the query string that we identified, and it's really worth understanding all the things that you can do, because it's very flexible. And if you want to get the complete story on it, then you would go to the linked page in which Magnus again talks to us, and he describes all the different options available through configuration blocks, the syntax for incorporating them, inside of your JavaScript API put together is through the parameters object with the pattern that we see here, name equals value separated by semicolons. And so this would go, let's go to simple, where we have parameters. I have it equal to nothing. You would simply put that kind of a pattern right here. So you could open this up to a certain page. And you know, since using JavaScript, the logic could actually dictate what page you do, depending on who you are or some other context. You can have a filter set, you can have a bookmark set, you can have certain items already marked, depending on the time of day or depending on what group you belong to. So that's kind of the most complex situation here. Talking about the parameters object that's passed when you create the, you instantiate the application object in this call. And we've given a reference for where you can get the complete lowdown on that. That is everything that I wanted to cover today. We've gone from simple iframe embedding through simple mashups on a page to mashups that involve two pieces talking to each other, or Spotfire talking to Bing maps, or having different third-party JavaScript libraries involved in the presentation of the page. And so with that, I'll stop this part of the conversation. Ninad, if it makes sense, I can look at some of the questions in the time that remains.
Yeah, I agree. So just for all the customers who are attending, what I will do is I'm going to pause the recording, but Jagrata will try to answer as much as possible. So we will have a little clean recording for viewing. So.